Members, when we suspended for the lunch break, debate was on part 3, and Brendan Burns has the call and has 4 minutes, 40 seconds remaining if he wishes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Before we broke for the lunch break, I should remind the House, discussing part 3 of the Taxation, GST and Remedial Matters Bill, and I was asking the Minister to clarify comments he'd made in his spirit of openness, I think he called it in his introductory remarks, about the regulatory impact statement, and whether, in fact, his reference to the regulatory impact statement refers to the bill itself as introduced to this House in August, a bill of some 57 pages, or whether his reference to the regulatory impact statement refers to the 70-page supplementary order paper released in the last 48 hours by the Minister, a document that is some 13 pages more than the actual bill itself, because I would have thought that if we're not going to have a select committee process to inquire into the details of the supplementary order paper, if we are going to have a set of urgency applying a fortnight before Christmas in this House as we try to see this bill and the supplementary order paper through, if we're not going to have any opportunity for others to have input to the bill through that select committee process, then I would have thought that a regulatory impact statement on the supplementary order paper, trying to get some sense of dispassionate analysis of the raft of changes it introduces, would make absolute sense, because it is detailed and complex, and New Zealanders have a right to know what is being passed, because this House just cannot give the scrutiny to it that a complex piece of tax legislation truly demands. And I'm also going to note that the last time this Minister featured in this House in respect of tax issues of any note was when he supplied the wrong tax speech notes to another Minister for a different bill than the Minister was actually speaking on. Well, I actually think that the Minister himself quite rightly took culpability for that error, because it was his office who had supplied the notes. But I suggest to the House that he's gone from bad to worse. He's gone from bad to worse, because here we have a situation where we don't just have the wrong speech notes for an already passed bill. He is giving speech after speech to the House defending an SOP which is bigger than the bill itself.
Is this SOP a flop?
Well, that's a comment that others might make. I'm not drawn to conspiracy theories. In my past life as a journalist, sometimes people came to me with things which suggested that there was a conspiracy, and I usually went for the other option, which is the stuff-up. The stuff-up. Normally it's a stuff-up rather than a conspiracy. But this one has different hallmarks to it, because as we've noted, we had a process where the Labor Party supported the bill's introduction, worked through the issues in the Select Committee to try and ensure that the legislation was valid, made a number of changes to the legislation, and our colleague Trevor Mallard was highlighting one of the particular concerns earlier, and I think it's repeated in another part of the bill, about the issue of IRD access to jointly held bank accounts for the tax debts of a particular person. A very astute observation from my learned colleague, the Honourable Trevor Mallard. He's not learned, no. But the point is that the Select Committee gave scrutiny to the bill to ensure that there weren't things contained within it that were not going to be good law for New Zealanders. But we have no opportunity whatsoever for that with the supplementary order paper, and it really is a precedent, a recipe rather, for disaster, because inevitably there will be things that come through from this bill that don't help New Zealanders, and we are very likely as a Parliament to have to revisit it. And I just would again note that of the 9 tax bills introduced to this Parliament by this Minister, generally highly regarded as a good and competent minister. In fact, yes, Mr. Chair.
I'll
Mr.
call
Chair.
Brendan Burns.
Thank you,
but
Mr.
can
Chair.
I remind the member we're on part 3.
Indeed, Mr. Chair.
And during the course of that speech, part 3 wasn't mentioned. So we're on part 3.
Well, I would suggest to you, Mr. Chair, that in fact I did introduce part 3 of the bill, but I will take your steer on that point. And you're quite right. This is part 3 of the bill relating to clauses 77 to 86. I think that's right. 77 to 86. And one of the parts of the bill I'd like the Minister just to give some clarification on is clause 82, which is the clause relating to disclosure of information for verification of government screen production payment entitlement. And I wanted to know whether this is a clause that will relate to the Hobbit deal. The Hobbit deal, done in a flash, done under urgency in effect by the Prime Minister at Premier House with the Hollywood moguls to ensure the Hobbit was here in New Zealand, but in fact the Hobbit was always coming, I think, to New Zealand. But I'd like to know whether this clause will have any relationship to the funding that's going to be provided by the government in that secret deal, done under urgency. Got some sort of hallmarks with this piece of legislation we're going through under Part 3 of the bill, clauses 77 to 86, and clause 82 as provided for in the bill is around replacing the phrase large budget screen production grant with the government screen production payment. And I would like to know whether the Hobbit productions will be a beneficiary of this change, and whether we should be reading anything into it. Now, the good thing about it is that this particular clause has actually come through in the bill as introduced. So the committee has had some opportunity for consideration and to take account of the wide range of issues that you must do in the select committee process, rather than the supplementary order paper, which of course has a huge number of changes incorporated in it, and which, given the fact that we are here under urgency with the government's wish and intent to see this bill passed today, gives no opportunity for us as members of the House. So I would like the Minister just to take a call and give some clarity as to whether that clause 82 will indeed be providing or allowing for the provision of financial support to the Hobbit. Is it that particular clause that will allow the taxpayer to fund, I think, to the tune of some tens of millions of dollars for the Hobbit series? In fact, there are two films. And when was that clause drafted ahead of the government's intent to provide support of that level to that particular bill? The other thing I'd like to say is around the issue of the complexity. And as a new member of this House, I must say, and a new member of the Finance and Expenditure Committee, when we're seeing tax legislation come through, it is eye-watering in detail, and it obviously is a task indeed for members of the Finance and Expenditure Committee to stay on top of the legislation, to ensure it gets the sorts of scrutiny that the Parliament would demand, that the New Zealand taxpayers would demand, because they understand the importance of tax legislation. Everybody in New Zealand is affected by tax legislation. Whether you're an earner or not, you're affected by tax legislation, because if you're not earning yourself, you're being supported by somebody who is earning and is therefore subject to Inland Revenue's regime. But I'd really say that we have the situation where, given the opportunities that we as the Select Committee have to scrutinise tax legislation, still stuff goes through. I referred, I think, to 9 different tax bills in just 2 years in this Parliament, whistling through at a fair rate of knots, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, I'd say, pages in total of complex detail, which we are entrusted to as a Select Committee to give due regard to listen to submissions, to try and make sure that that legislation is trying to do what the government's intent is, to look for the fishhooks from it. And I think we do a pretty good job in a bipartisan manner across that Select Committee, and that relates as much to Part 3 of this bill and those clauses 77 to 86 as to any other part of the bill. But of course that is not applying in respect of the supplementary order paper tabled by the Minister just 48 hours ago, a 70-page document which makes it extraordinarily hard for anybody to really follow what is being introduced. And I'd challenge members opposite to take a call and take the value of the call process and give some real substance to their contribution to this debate, to let the Parliament know, to let the people of New Zealand